In the capital outskirts cemetery, a man's voice rang out calling the situation absurd. He noted that wasn't a place someone like herself should be coming and going freely and asked if she, Lady Hylia Delphine, even knew why she was there. This striking young man turned out to be the commander of the Black Mercenary Corps, Mercenary King Gerald. She told him she knew what that place was, mentioning the old gossip about how that place granted any request without fail before revealing she'd come to make a commission. The man's gaze locked onto her in agreement. He boasted, claiming even if the request was to bring the Emperor's head, it would be possible, but of course, the more dangerous the job, the more astronomical the fee. Without wasting any more time, she reveals her request: "Please marry me." He was stunned, still stuck on her words while she just moved on like it was nothing, saying she'll decide the time and place. "And, on the day of my upcoming wedding, kidnap me, after that you'll marry me." He spat that her request ridiculous. His mood flipped in an instant as he insisted that place was a mercenary corps asking her to find someone else to marry. However, she simply insisted she'd come to the right place, the Black Mercenary Corps everyone feared and its ruler, the Mercenary King Gerald. If she was being clear, she wanted to marry him. The commander of the Black Mercenary Corps, Mercenary King Gerald, she knew the man's true ability. The bearer of dragon blood passed down through the Imperial line, Crown Prince Arfad. A merciless man who would behead anyone who ever crossed him, a man destined to become a mad killer in the future, and she'd come there to ask him for a proposal. For clarification, he asks if even after knowing who he is and what kind of place that place was, she was asking him to carry out a bride on kidnapping her. Her expression lifted in an instant. That was exactly what she was talking about, and her commission was that after kidnapping her, he immediately signs the marriage contract and get it notarized by the temple so that they become husband and wife. But just as she was about to continue, his sharp voice immediately cut in, declaring it was enough. He stepped forward, stating that wasn't worth hearing any further. "Are you joking with me right now? Keep shouting nonsense and I'll really kill you." She grew nervous, realizing his eyes had changed in an instant. She was scared. He was the kind of man who could easily kill her, but still. She gathered her courage, claiming it wasn't nonsense and he'll have no choice but to hear her out. If she was going to back down that easily, she wouldn't have started. Her voice came again, this time even holder than the last time, as she noted, "If you don't, you'll die." To explain why she sought the Crown Prince out, she had to go way back. Grand Duke Ludwig Keon, the Emperor's favored nephew, the man who used her and threw her away in her 3 previous lives. He was a man overflowing with ambition enough to enter into a loveless marriage just to seize her family's wealth, the Duchy of Delphine. He was also obsessively possessive, wanting her by his side no matter the atrocities he committed. Also, Evangeline Luce wasn't the only one she needed to get revenge on. To destroy them both, there was one thing she needed to take care of first. She stepped out onto the balcony and let out a loud shout. Later, Ludwig appeared in her room, beads of sweat settles on his cheek as he stood in shock. He asked Hylia what the suddenly commotion was about, why she was suddenly deciding not to wear the wedding dress they prepared. He yelled at her, asking her not to be ridiculous. He reminded her their wedding was happening the next day, and brought up how she said the dress was what she liked multiple times. A lady with blonde hair suddenly spoke from beside him, calling him brother. She asked him to calm down, saying they shouldn't be fighting the day before the wedding. Tugging at his shirt, she explained that it was normal for the bride to feel anxious right before the big day and asked him to be a little bit more understanding. However, underneath her facade, Hylia simply cursed at them, calling the sight of her repulsive. She wouldn't be wearing the wedding dress they prepared, as she could still remember vividly her first life. She'd worn the dress without knowing a thing. Back then, she didn't even dream of what their relationship was like. But even after their wedding, Evangeline said this to her. "Poor stupid Hylia, you had no idea that Ludwig and my initials were engraved into that dress. You really felt like the protagonist of this world, didn't you? You were nothing more than a prop to make our secret love more thrilling. Thanks to you it was a very exciting wedding." She sneered at her, as if she could contain her amusement. Evangeline Luce. All she knew about her was that she was the daughter of the current empress, whom the emperor married after the crown prince's mother died, and because of that she is royalty but shares no blood with the imperial family. She planned to use that to her advantage, starting with a marriage to Ludwig to bring the empire's most powerful men to their knees. That's why she covered her husband more than anyone. Even in the present day, she clings to his arms so obviously, hardly how anyone should act towards someone else's husband-to-be. She truly had no shame. Stepping up her game, she ran into Ludwig's arms asking him to listen to her explanation. Someone had embroidered someone else's initials into her wedding dress. Ludwig tried to calm her down, explaining it was common practice to embroider the bride and groom's initials onto the wedding dress. However, she simply pointed out that they weren't her initials, they belonged to someone else. Evangeline with an awkward laugh told her that couldn't be right, claiming the dress must have been swapped with someone else's, but she just noted how the fittings were all handled at the Delphine's estate. She raised her voice slightly as she reminded her she'd supervised the whole process with her. She held up the dress showing what was clearly written, it was an L and E. She cried, claiming someone who is jealous of their marriage must have done that, asking what she was supposed to do. She went to Ludwig and asked if possible someone could be trying to sabotage their wedding. She following saying it felt as though a woman who hated her and wanted to steal her away was very close to them. Ludwig, however, simply asked if she was aware how ridiculous she sounded. He reminded her their marriage was arranged by the emperor himself. He told her he understood she was upset about the dress but asked if she wasn't planning to defy an imperial command. Again, he mentioned the wedding was tomorrow and asked her to be a good girl, claiming they didn't have time to prepare for a new dress. However, she refused. She rushed to the balcony, crying that she wouldn't wear a dress with another woman's name on it. She insisted she wouldn't allow their precious wedding be ruined, that she'd rather die than let that happen. Ludwig called out to her immediately. He noted that place was dangerous and asked her to come down. However, she remained there. She told him rather than wearing that filthy dress of unknown intent, she'd rather throw herself down. Silence fell between them quickly, and as the silence continued, she wondered what Ludwig would do. She already knew what his answer would be. He needed their marriage to fulfill his dream of becoming the ultimate power. So he couldn't afford to ignore her just yet. Without a word, he grabbed the dress with one hand, a candle with the other, and set the dress on fire. His sister called out to him from behind asking what he'd done, but he was only focused on getting Hylia down. With open arms, he assured her she no longer had anything to worry about. He told her he didn't know who'd committed that foul deed, but he wouldn't allow them ruin their wedding. He extended his hand towards her, asking her to take it. Then she fell voluntarily into his arms with a satisfied smile as she said she knew he was on her side. After getting calm, she reminded him the wedding was going to hold the next day and asked what she'll do without a dress. Without delay, he called out to Evangeline asking if she didn't have a dress. The new dress she had made to attend the wedding the next day, the one the Empress had given her as a gift. That would suffice as a wedding dress. You will give that dress to your sister-in-law. Later, Hylia stood in front of the mirror with the dress, thinking of how she'd only planned to give her a little shock because she was disgusted by her behavior. She didn't think she'd actually get to snatch her dress away. But now that she thought about it, she realized she should have done so sooner. More importantly, the initials on the dress, everyone else seemed to already know about them. They probably took bribes and turned the other way the entire time her wedding was being prepared. She reminded herself she must stay strong after all. The revenge hadn't begun yet, and above all, that might be her last chance. The wedding ring Ludwig received from the Emperor, that ring, set with 3 purple diamonds. For some reason, every time she regressed, 1 diamond would vanish and she would wake up on the night before the wedding. Considering how the light of every diamond has faded, she realizes that must be her final opportunity. This time, she made a vow to herself, not to fail. In a new scene, her maid Annie comes into her room to check if she's all right. Immediately she notices her swollen eyes and showers her with care, and in response she thanks her. Annie was the daughter of the nanny who'd raised her and someone who died so many times trying to save her each time. This time, she'll definitely save her. She leans forward and whispers into her ear that about the initials on her dress they were from the Marquis's Ruth daughter. She reminds her she told her so many times that woman was suspicious. She tells Annie she's heard Sir Beltane was looking for her and asks her to tell him to come back that night if he had something to say. Later that night, a knight of Delphin, Sir Remus Beltane came to her. In her third life, he helped her escape, and unlike most of Delphine's knights who sided with Ludwig, he was the only person who never betrayed her. Along with Annie, he was the only one on her side and truly an honest and consistent person. He reported that he had something he wanted to tell her. Without wasting time, he revealed the Grand Duke wasn't marrying her out of love, he only wanted the power and legitimacy of the Delphin Duchy. His relationship with Lady Ruth was also suspicious. He pleaded with her to reconsider even at that moment. She recalled how in her past lives she kept avoiding him whenever he spoke frankly. He never gave up though and tried to persuade her even till the end, but the situation had already ended in the worst way. In the present day, he pleads with her to reconsider for her sake. She slowly rose to her feet, responding dryly that it was too late, the wedding was tomorrow and he would never accept a request to break off the engagement. He tried to convince her even more, but she just continued and declared, as the only direct descendant of the Delphin Duchy, she commanded him as a knight of Delphin. Although it was too late, but she was glad she realized it. This time it was her turn to protect him. "Tonight, escort me." An hour later, they tiptoed around the duchy. With Knight Beltane watching her back, she wasn't worried. With that man, the strongest amongst the Delphin Knights, he'd make sure she can escape the mansion smoothly. However, a voice suddenly started her. "How could you do this to me?" It was Evangeline. She demanded an answer from the Grand Duke as to how he dared give her dress to her. He simply stood unbothered, asking her to calm down. What if someone heard? As he reminded her that wouldn't have happened if she hadn't embroidered those initials on Hylia's dress in the first place. He brought up how he needed the power of the Delphin Duchy to stand up against the Crown Prince and asked why she was suddenly acting like that. In response, she asked him why he thought the Empress and she put in so much effort into that wedding. She'd endured everything because they ultimately needed the Delphin family. His voice pitched a lot higher as he asked if, despite knowing that, she was still being so annoying over one simple dress. She pressed her teeth together as if holding back her anger, but she couldn't, and in the end delivered a resounding slap to his face. The realized of what she'd done set in sooner than she expected, and she leaned forward apologizing. She tried to explain that she'd gotten so emotional and made a mistake, however he just pushed her hand off, asking her to stop being ridiculous. Then he turned to leave, ordering her to go back to the palace that night and not even think of attending the wedding. He delivered on final warning to her. If she tried to ruin things again, he wouldn't let it slide that time. Meanwhile, Hylia watched with a satisfied grin, to think there was already a crack between them so soon. It was even more funny when she considered how the two of them were so crazy about each other and her life was ruined as a result. She clenched her fists, thinking she'd absolutely not let things go their way. However, she suddenly felt the warmth of someone else's hand around her clenched fist. Then she heard a familiar voice call out, "Princess?" He apologized for his rudeness, explaining that she was trembling so much so he was worried. She looked at him, a smile appearing on her lips as she thought, "You're worried I might be heartbroken." Now, for the sake of those who cared about her like that, she realized she must survive that life. She had one chance left, the final gamble with her life on the line. In this life, she would make the Crown Prince her ally. She'll help him with the information she gained through her regressions and earn his trust. Dragon blood ran through the Imperial family, and those who inherited it also inherited madness. The madness becomes more severe the stronger the dragon blood, so the Crown Prince who has dragon blood as strong as the founding emperor eventually goes mad from it. The emperor, unable to trust Arpad, consumed with madness, tried to enthrone his nephew Ludwig instead. To counter this, Arpad hides in the catacombs underground and takes refuge except on nights where the crimson moon rises, when he must remain stable, while operating under the identity of mercenary King Gerald. In the end, he was killed by his father the Emperor every time in the future, but this time, she'll stop him from dying because she knows how to save him from his fate. And to save him and at the same time herself, she went to find him. He asks her what she means by saying he'll die, however she simply remains calm as she explains that if he accepts her commission, she'll make sure he doesn't go mad and ascends to the throne. She noted that if the emperor was to discover his dual identity, it would be hard for him to ascend the throne, and not only that but his life could be threatened as well. A smile appeared on his face as he asked if she was saying she was aware the mercenary king's true identity was himself. He agreed it would be quite troublesome if that was revealed. It would be more disastrous if the emperor saw the mercenary corps as a private army and thought he was plotting a rebellion. She heard this and was instantly filled with relief, thinking they were finally getting somewhere, until the color of his eyes suddenly changed. He grabbed both of her hands, pinning her in place as he asked her to listen. "I hate people who try to control me, saying you know I'm the crown prince, saying you'll help me become emperor. How incredibly arrogant. Don't you think that would be crossing the line?" She hadn't meant to get him upset, but she couldn't die like that either. If she couldn't persuade him, she'll just end up dying anyway, so she decided to do the one thing she did best. "I'm sorry, but I'm not afraid of death. So go ahead and stab me. In the end, the one who would regret it would be you, mercenary king." There's a shift in his eye and he lets go, after which he delivers a brutal remark that he'd never heard the princess of the Delphin Duchy had a mental illness. A smirk suddenly appears on his lips as he calls her brave and confident princess, asking her to then tell him how exactly she plans to keep a madman from going mad. She responded saying he was asking her to reveal the method without anything in return. She continued saying if she revealed everything now he'd just kill her, and he responded sharing he could actually kidnap her and lock her somewhere no one knows and then proceed to torture her until she talks. Realizing he wouldn't fall for that kind of trick, she resolved to a new one. This time she asks if he really thought she'd come there unprepared. She reveals she's arranged countless contingency plans. If she didn't return to the manor, she's made sure the information will definitely reach his enemies. So, killing her wouldn't do him any good. He asks how he can trust her words, saying her following her blackmails carried too much risk for him. She pressed her eyes shut, agreeing with him. Then she suggested, how about as an advance payment for his reward, she'll give him the first hint. He lets out a sigh before releasing her hand, agreeing to see what she's got, and without wasting time she hands him a bag, asking him to open it. He opened the bag and inside it was Agrippina's tears, one of the 5 blessed gems he has been searching for. "Now if you accept my commission, I'll tell you about the remaining payment too." He didn't look impressed, rather he muttered that it certainly seemed like a valuable item. Then he asked her if she believed he, a crown prince, would be blinded by a gem of that level. She raised a brow, pointing out that it wasn't just a simple gem, it was one of the 5 blessed gems he'd been searching for desperately, and she just placed one of them in his hand, but there was one tiny detail he didn't know about. Neither Agrippina's tears, nor any other blessed gems or divine artifact would be of help with your madness. The only way you'll learn how to resolve your madness is through me. Before she could react, he brought out a dagger and drove it into the wall beside her. "How bold of you to make me angry and call that an advance payment," he spat in anger. "I'm curious how you plan to pay the balance." He reminds him again she's already said it, she'll ensure he doesn't go mad and becomes emperor. He leaned forward, demanding she explain that method properly, warning that if she thought of using nonsense to trap him politically, she wouldn't make it back alive, but she remained composed, telling him he'll find out after he accepts her commission. "I've already given you the advance payment, all you have to do is choose whether to accept this commission or not." He let out a soft chuckle, calling that the most absurd commission he'd ever received, before agreeing to accept the commission on the condition that she kept to her words. In a new scene, a lady stared out into the crimson-red moon rising that night, calling it ominous no matter when she saw it. She wondered aloud if it could be that the crown prince was returning, and the man behind her responded that he was busy that day too and hadn't even left his quarters. However, before she could speak again, the crown prince suddenly appeared. They exclaimed in shock. The man asked why he was back so soon, and he just responded asking what was wrong with him returning to his own home. He turned around and asked if perhaps they were afraid he'd go mad and rampage and kill them all before turning around. His gaze fell on the crimson moon and his mind drifted to how few people knew that to suppress his madness he went to the catacombs every time the crimson moon rose. Yet that woman knew information about both the mercenary king and the crown prince. Moreover, her proposal that she could keep him from going mad. He'd asked her to prove the sincerity of her words, and without thinking she swore that if she were lying, her wrists would fall off. He couldn't entirely be sure of that source of information, the woman's identity, but at the very least, he couldn't let her use that ability for Ludwig. Come to think of it, this wasn't a commission I could refuse from the start. She dared to come and blackmail me. The princess's wedding is tomorrow, isn't it? The scene transitions to the day after she made the commission to Arpid. The morning of her fourth wedding day, which she'd been dreading for, finally arrived. Ludwig asks if she was aware how awkward she'd made things for him that day, questioning with such a weak heart how she would even fulfill her duties as Duchess. And no matter how upset you were, what did you do to your neck to get that cut? She stayed silent until her lips slowly parted and she revealed, but Ludwig, there was an intruder at dawn. With tears streaming down her face, she explained that when she'd opened her eyes, someone had a blade to her throat. He asked her not to talk nonsense, saying the security was tight the previous night and suggests she might have had a nightmare and hurt herself in confusion. She stood firmly, asking if he really thought she could make a wound like that on her own. Now she points out if it wasn't an intruder, it must have been an insider. See, someone is trying to sabotage our wedding. See, I told you, it seems like someone who secretly loves you is trying to interfere with our marriage. Come to think of it, she asks where he was the previous night, revealing she'd called his name several times. You weren't with someone else during that time, right, Ludwig? However, rather than pressure, he suddenly grabbed her wrist. He asked sternly if she couldn't distinguish between what to say or not on the very day of their sacred wedding. He suddenly pushed her, asking her not to throw a tantrum at him because of her delusions. He demanded to know if whining like that even on the day of her wedding will make her feel better. Just as she fell to the floor, the Emperor suddenly arrived. His expression immediately changed as he called out to Ludwig, demanding to know what he was doing. He asked if he was fighting with the bride on the day of the wedding. However, Ludwig tried to play it as a misunderstanding, turning to her for confirmation. She sided with him, apologizing for causing a disturbance, but that only caused the Emperor to notice the mark around her wrist. Noticing that, he remarked that now he was even laying hands on his fiancée and announced that he was very disappointed in him. He reminded him he was the one who'd pushed for that marriage with Hylia Delphin and warned that if he disappointed him one more time, he'd have no choice but to consider other options. After that, he turned away, calling him a pathetic fool. The crowds cheered her on, congratulating her on her wedding. However, those simple words of blessing for a new bride just appeared like a curse to her. More importantly, she wondered where the crown prince was. At noon in front of the plaza, he should definitely appear, but she couldn't spot him at all. Just as she considered maybe he'd abandoned her cause, it all seemed absurd. A woman suddenly appeared saying she'd cure his madness and help him become emperor. Maybe he suspected her and abandoned the plan. However, her carriage suddenly pulled to a stop and the person that showed up was none other than the crown prince, Arpid. The crowd wondered why he was at the bride's procession. The knight riding her carriage suggested he come back after the bride's procession to the temple was finished. However, a single word from him left the entire crowd in shock: move aside. He revealed there was something he urgently needed to confirm and asked that he not stand in his way, and the knights never leave their positions but hold their post. A knight tried to sneak around and informed the Grand Duke about this suspicious situation. However, the crown prince unexpectedly hit him. Then with a smile he asks if he hadn't warned them not to move from their spot. This time it was an arm, but next time it could be your neck. Now let me ask again, where is Princess Hylia? The crowd watched in shock, wondering if his madness could have flared up for him to commit such violence on the day of his cousin's wedding ceremony. She stepped out of the carriage and paid her respects to the crown prince. She told him she had no idea why he was seeking her, but if they were to continue at that rate, the wedding would be delayed, so please. He stepped forward and without a word lifted the veil covering her face. They all gasped in shock. the crown prince had dared to remove her veil without even having the official ceremony yet. The knight from before yelled that he couldn't do that, to remove a veil the Grand Duke hadn't even removed yet. But a fearless knight suddenly stepped forward, shielding her from the crown prince. He demanded to know how he could insult a noble lady like that. He continued stating he wasn't aware of the circumstances that had led to that, but it was an insult to House Delphin. Please show respect to our princess. She spoke from behind him. This time she pleaded that he shows mercy so that she may go to the temple, while the prince just watched her act in shock. She'd come all the way out there so it would be easier to kidnap her. She was a woman capable of that kind of acting. He recalled how she'd acted so boldly in front of him and thought, going along with her act isn't so difficult. So now I'm playing the role of a crown prince forcing an abduction marriage? He crossed blades with Beltane, leaving him a bit injured. This prompted her to cry out in fear. She begged the crown prince to show mercy, but this gesture only threw the crown prince into genuine confusion. What's this? That expression isn't an act, he pondered. Where did that modest and pitiful performance from moments ago go? She's genuinely worried about that knight. For some reason, it's irritating. He asked if the knight served her, and she remained calm as she answered, saying yes. She continued stating a knight's sins were his master's sins, so if he desired to hold someone accountable, he should hold her. With that, a smirk appeared on his lips. He shoved the knight aside before stepping even closer. For that crime, you clearly said you'd pay with your own mouth. Without uttering a single word, he threw her over his shoulder. She demanded to know what he was doing, but he just responded, asking her to remember she owed him a debt worth that knight's life. He continued, adding that he was someone who didn't understand the barbaric custom of abduction marriage to begin with, and she must repay that debt to him. The first knight called out to him, and he simply thanked him for his cooperation, saying he'd confirmed everything he needed. After checking, she's definitely too good for someone like Ludwig, so I'll be taking Princess Delphin. The price for the insult of removing her veil will be settled by me becoming the groom. Tell Ludwig too, there's no need to keep waiting at the temple, so he should go home. Abduction marriage. The last time an abduction marriage happened and was recognized in the Empire was about 300 years ago, when the Empire was founded. The founding of the Empire began when a fierce dragon abducted a beautiful princess from a wedding procession, so in a way, it was only natural. But now the crown prince, known to have inherited the dragon bloodline most strongly, has abducted a bride on her wedding day. It was truly a reenactment of an even matching the founding emperor's birth legend. At the same time, the news finally reached Ludwig. He demanded to know if it made sense even with all those knights present. While Evangeline subtly tried to get him to calm down, she asked him to stop, if he had any idea how many eyes were watching, but he wasn't bothered with that. She asked him to get a hold of himself, but he snapped, asking if she wanted him to calm down, watching a man who couldn't do anything while his bride was kidnapped. The knight on the floor was pleased to be killed, however he simply noted there was nothing they could possibly do, since the one who abducted the princess was none other than Crown Prince Arpid. He rushed to see the emperor, however the guards appointed refused to let him in, insisting the emperor was in an urgent discussion and ordered that no one be let in. He went quiet, considering how the emperor was probably discussing how to handle the situation in a way that benefited him without any concern for his position. So, he could only hope his voice would reach him. He called out for the emperor, pleading with him to relieve him of that injustice. He insisted it was an insult to the capital, claiming there wasn't anyone in the capital who didn't know about the situation and he'd been wronged. However, inside, the emperor simply sat calmly with the current empress Isabel, who asked how he planned to handle that matter. He responded saying he was considering it, as neither the abducted bride nor the one who'd abducted her had shown their faces. However, the empress mentioned how people were already spreading rumors that the Grand Duke's marriage had fallen apart. She continued, revealing she was truly worried actually about Arpid. Seeing him commit such barbaric acts, could he truly have been consumed by madness? The large scar on her wrist appeared when Abroad first showed signs of madness around the early age of 10. Since that day, Isabel hadn't been able to lift her hand properly, now showing him that scar meant she wanted him to remember the madness. She continued, claiming as expected the crown prince had inherited the late empress's madness completely. However, the emperor immediately cut her off, warning her not to mention Roxelin in that matter, especially now when she needs to be careful with her words and actions. She apologized, but that didn't stop the emperor from reminiscing about his first wife, Roxelin, his one and only former empress who left him and departed far too early. Abroad resembled her too much. Like the scar you left on my cheek when you were consumed by tremendous madness, that madness cannot simply be hidden. That's why I can trust Arpad even less. 3 days had passed already since the crown prince abducted her. During that time, they rode day and night for 3 days, and now they've reached the outskirts of the capital. Just like the crown prince, she too was negative about the abduction marriage because it was just a violent method to possess someone without their consent. Nevertheless, there was a reason she requested that. Because of the symbolic meaning abduction marriage held in the empire's history, it would remind people once again what led to the founding of the empire and was perfect for solidifying the crown prince's position. Ironically, it was Ludwig who taught her that. At some point before her regression, after Ludwig framed her, he performed an abduction marriage that was nothing more than a fabricated show to marry Evangeline. After Arpad's death, when he became crown prince, he used the founding legend to establish legitimacy, and this time she was going to use it against him. She raised her head and noticed the crown prince looked upset all of a sudden. She suggested he might be tired from the journey, and he responded saying not at all. She mentioned how they'd already escaped from the capital and asked if they couldn't slow down a bit. He firmly refused. He told her they didn't know when their pursuers might catch up and asked her to hold on tight instead. Finally, they arrived at the Imperial villa on the outskirts of the capital. She beamed with excitement over how she could finally shower and asked where the beds were. He leaned forward in response, and with a whisper he teased her, saying his wife was excessively eager, calling it embarrassing. She opened her mouth in protest, however she suddenly stopped once a realization suddenly hit her. Why was he the only one who was perfectly clean? At the same time an elderly man's voice suddenly rang out, "Your Highness the Crown Prince, you really came." He didn't waste time with pleasantries and instead immediately asked that they continue as discussed, officiate the wedding between me and Princess Hylia Delphin and be our witness. The priest admitted that he was still a bit concerned, explaining that if the marriage was established through an abduction marriage like that, people wouldn't dare speak up because of his position, but ultimately it will be the princess who becomes the subject of scandal, and yet he truly intended to go on with that wedding. The crown prince, still calm, noted how it's already been 3 days since he abducted the princess and asked if by chance he were to return her now her reputation would still be intact. With that he pointed out that the part that damaged the princess's honor less was to marry him. He reminds him he's already said to him that he'd do anything to repay the debt he owed to his mother. She stepped forward agreeing with the crown prince and declared in front of the priest her wish to marry him. She tells him she thought it through for 3 days and reached that conclusion, asking that he respects her decision. He tells her he understands and after that asks that the two of them come up to the altar. With no one else in attendance, the wedding ceremony was also simple. They exchanged vows before the chief god and the gods. Write their names on the marriage certificate and receive holy oils on their head along with the words of blessing. With this, you two are reborn as a married couple watched over by the chief god and gods. Now please, share your vow of a kiss. Her eyes snapped open immediately. She'd thought about everything but that, and with the crown prince no less. His thumb gently brushed her cheek. Then, convincing herself it was all part of the ceremony, she allowed herself to melt into his arms before their lips connect. Her heart felt like it was going to burst. With her eyes closed she could feel every sensation more clearly. It felt strange. She'd done kiss vows several times before, so why did this one suddenly feel different from the one she'd shared with Ludwig? She thought they could let go of each other, but it didn't seem like he planned to let go. How long was that going to last? She pulled away, her cheeks cherry red as she told him it was enough. She pointed out that the priest was also there and asked that they stop, but his next words left her speechless. "Hylia, you are, just who are you?" She asked what he meant but just remained silent. His eyes shifted to the side as he considered how strange it was. After experiencing countless signs of madness and rampaging states, he thought he'd become accustomed to controlling himself. But just now, from the moment their lips touched, he completely lost his reason. Moreover, the beats inside him that always tried to run wild seemed to become docile. He'd never felt that sensation before in his life, which naturally begged the question. This woman. What exactly is she? At the same time, in Istrid Empire, the Imperial capital, Evangeline rushed to her mother. She asked what the Emperor's response was to the Crown Prince's outrageous behavior. She asked if he'd punished the two of them or something, and her mother responded saying no, rather he only asked them to wait. She explained that since they hadn't still found the Crown Prince or the bride, it seemed he couldn't decide what punishment to give. Ludwig snapped, asking if the crime wasn't clear whether or not the culprits were present. He cried that as expected the Emperor took his real son's side, however the Empress ordered him to keep his mouth shut. She mentioned that the only one who could control the Crown Prince after all was the Emperor, warning him to refrain from words that would incur the Emperor's wrath. Evangeline, clouded in confusion, asked why the Crown Prince would choose that woman of all people. However, the Empress simply replied saying that was why what came next was important. Since their combination didn't make sense, she suggested they inflate public opinion and rumors. They'll shape public sentiment, making that incident seem like nothing more than a happening caused by the Crown Prince's madness. They'll create a dangerous image of Aprad as someone who's lost judgment and could rampage at any time, and so the marriage between the princess and Grand Duke must be properly completed. They needed to create that public opinion. If that happened, the king wouldn't be able to ignore that influence either. On the other hand, Hylia soaked in a bathtub. She celebrated finally taking the first step away from that bastard, Ludwig. She'd gotten the official deal now, all she needed to do was to return to the capital to clean up. By the way, her mind drifted to Sir Beltane. He was even injured and must have believed she was actually kidnapped. She suddenly panicked as the thought of him trying to take responsibility with his life and draw the sword popped into her mind. With his strong loyalty, he's fully capable of that. And Annie must also think she was helplessly abducted. She was worried, but it was better that the two of them didn't know about her plan. She just hoped the two of them would wait patiently until she could tell them the whole story. The scene quickly shifted. Then, Princess, I hope you have a happy night. She got into the bed looking forward to relieving some fatigue when she suddenly noticed the Crown Prince was also present. He teased her again. As expected, my bride is very eager indeed. She asks why he's there that night, assuring him if he was worried about others' eyes, she'd ask the servants to stay away from their rooms. The Crown Prince's reaction was priceless. Do I need a separate reason? Today is our wedding night, isn't that right, my bride? That's all for now, guys, and as always, I'll see you guys in my next video. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. Thank you